Dr. Arielle Schwartz. Welcome to the How Humans Work podcast. Great to see you.
Thank you. We were talking about the pronunciation. You nailed it. Thank you. It's good to see you, Jeff.
That's the first hurdle. Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's great to have you here.
Thank
It's
you.
been a long time in the oven getting to this point, and some things have evolved since then. And I guess I'll just go right to what my hope is for the conversation. And my hope for our conversation is to explore the issue of trauma while also looking at society at the same time. And I think, in a way, when I've been kind of cooking my ideas about what this could be, what this conversation could hold, is the possibility of, well, many things have shown up along the way, but the main one was like, can we look at what's going on in our society through the lens of trauma? As somebody who is a clinical psychologist, highly trauma informed, resilience informed, that's pretty much the essence as I understand your work. Is that fair? With a
Yes.
good dose of embodied yoga and somatic practices and some other tools in the toolkit, of course. Someone like you, when you look at what's going on in our society and you have the knowledge of what happens with people through trauma, like,
Yeah.
what do you see? Right? Like, I'm like, oh, what do you see? Like, and yet you can answer that, but I'm also like, well, that's such a big question, right? It's such a big question, and thought maybe we can work our way there. But that's my hope, is to kind of like basically increase trauma informed social awareness around what we're dealing with. Yeah. How's that sound to you?
It sounds fantastic. And I already have like little nuggets of association to your question. And I wonder if I might just put those out there before
Yeah.
they drift away from my
Sounds
mind.
good.
Um, the first thought that comes up is when we're looking maybe through the lens of the nervous system, if I just pull that in for a moment, what we might see is what nervous system state is dominant in our kind of in what we're observing in each other or in ourselves in response to the world. So, are we in more of a flight state, like restless, agitated, can't sit still, always kind of looking for something to kind of take us out of being with our felt sense, whether that's the distraction of social media or whether that's, you know, just feeling like we can't quite reside in ourselves? Or are we kind of always looking for what's the next fight? What's the next way that we have to protect ourselves? In some way or another, are we in fight or flight? And then we can look at this other end of the continuum where sometimes the way that we're responding to our world, to each other, or what we're observing in each other is more of the state of no matter what I do, it's not going to make a difference. So what's the point? And more of just this overarching state of hopelessness or despair that is certainly, I think, arising a lot in response to the ongoing, what we'll call barrage of threat, kind of threat experience, whether that's in the news or in our personal lives. Like we're getting so much exposure to that can push us in that hyper aroused or hypo aroused direction pretty easily.
You said you had a couple things, so I want to, if there was a secondary thing to build on that.
I think that, in terms of how we how we observe each other, maybe the question becomes, how do we observe what's happening in our world or ourselves with greater compassion? Because I think that when we lose that, what comes in its place is more separation, more other versus a sense of togetherness in how we're navigating what's happening. And I think, especially as you're kind of looking at community and trauma's impact on us in community, one of the biggest consequences of trauma is that we feel in some way exiled from the pack, like we don't belong to a community or of this world anymore.
Thank you for that. And what I'm hearing is you presencing the nervous system and tracking what our nervous system level is at and kind of a polyvagal spirit, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it brings me to the piece of work that you have in your trauma recovery audiobook on Sounds True, which I listened to and I thought was really, really great.
Thank you.
Um, is this idea of window of tolerance. To me, as I started to kind of put together the idea of trauma, society experience, and that there's these different layers of me towards society, me towards community, what I'm bringing and what society is doing to me. And so
Mhm.
maybe talk a little bit about the framework of window of tolerance that kind of help us guide how we track and regulate ourselves through our social engagement and through social dynamics.
Yeah. I think it's maybe just worthy for a moment to credit Dan Siegel with this concept of window of tolerance. He brought this forward probably back in the late 90s, and it really shaped our understanding of how we talk about trauma responses. And if we just even kind of basically describe what is the window of tolerance for someone that's not familiar with this yet, it's this idea that when I'm in my window, I am able to respond effectively and in kind of the best manner possible to my emotions, to how what's happening inside of me, and also to your emotions and what's happening in you. And so it gives me this kind of bandwidth, if we want to look at it that way, from which I can respond with great care, with great mindfulness. Like I'm in reflection about the actions that I take. And when we're outside of our window of tolerance, we might lose that reflective capacity or that mindful capacity. We're much more likely to be in reactivity to each other. And then that reactivity goes into those two domains that I named before. One would be in hyperarousal or more of a sympathetic driven reactivity,
Yeah.
and conversely into that hypoarousal being less capable of responding.
I consider myself stress informed. I've been studying stress for a while, super interested in the different stress responses. And I think this is probably a good way because you're really talking about the quality of the response, maybe at a neurobiology level, but also just what happens when we feel different adversities or different challenges in our environment. So and there's this deeper sense which I really paying attention to your work, studying your work recently just helped me deepen my comfort with the word trauma, the idea of trauma. It's spoken about a lot. It's, as an acupuncturist, as somebody who works in the healing arts, I'm familiar a lot with like physical trauma, and I get emotional trauma and I really get stressed, but your work has taken me to a deeper level of that. And so I want to kind of set up this idea that we do have a portfolio of responses in us to help adapt to different situations and kind of help us move towards, okay, what are these normal stresses, irritations? I'm inside my window of tolerance, I'm cool, I can relate. I'm outside my window of tolerance, and maybe I'm starting to get reactive, maybe I'm a little stressed. And then what's the difference between that and when people actually are carrying the different kinds of traumas there are, so we can start understanding trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that trauma is a tricky word, right? It gets thrown a lot or thrown around a lot right now, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
on the nose. And and to some degree it's valuable that we're using the word more because we have a certain amount of recognizing what maybe we had to make okay that wasn't okay, and that we can start to validate more of some of the more subtle or invisible traumas that may have happened or the way that life events have impacted us. And then I think sometimes it gets tossed about a little too much, right? In the sense of like, I had to, I got stuck in traffic. It was so traumatizing. Whatever,
Yes.
whatever the
Yeah.
things are.
Well, in my
And
notes, I have the word wounded, right? Because I like the word wounding. I think it's a much better word. And it's actually the etymology of trauma means wound, which you
yes,
may know probably.
yes,
And,
yes.
and then I think about just more visceral, and I think about the word pressure is a way better word than stress because stress is
Mm,
abstract. Trauma feels abstract because we don't really know what it means, but that sense
yeah,
of the wounds that we feel when we get hurt and we can't
yeah.
figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think where wound rolls into trauma is, did we have enough support to help us navigate the wound? Did we have the resources that we needed to help us work with what that evoked in us? And when we get to a point where, in response to a wounding event, what comes up within us are feelings of, no matter what I did, I couldn't make a difference. No matter what I did, I couldn't make it stop. I felt trapped. I felt powerless. I felt helpless to change my circumstances. When that's paramount, then we start to see that the wound lingers over time. It gets embedded much more inside of us, and it starts to weave its way into our overall sense of self. Right? Where now I am, in some way.
Disempowerment,
Exactly.
that I don't have agency or faculties. And this kind of, brings up the why is so many of our traumas or our hurts related to being a child, because that's kind of the child state. We have so few skills when it comes to the big stuff, right?
And we're so dependent upon others, and in a necessary way as children, to find our resources out there. And if when we look even at, I'll use the word stress again, but I'm going to use it in a bit of a kind of a grounded sense, right? Like, we can think of the three kinds of stresses that we might face in childhood. And some of them are the kind of normal, healthy, everyday stressors that are supported enough by our caregivers that we actually learn to trust that we're going to experience some kinds of stressors on a regular basis throughout our lives that we can navigate, and as a result, they resolve back into a sense of connection and safe enough. And we can call that a positive stress response. And then there's another level of stress where we experience something really adverse, not the everyday stressor, a flood, a fire, a major accident, a major loss of a person in that child's life. And that child has the support systems that wraps around them to help them navigate those processes. And as a result, we actually see that for the most part, those children come out resilient. They come out with a built sense of hard things can happen, really, really challenging things. And I know that there's ways that I can access support and can be okay. But then there's the third kind. And this is what we would call the toxic stress response, the toxic stress experience. In this case, there's a really hard thing, and there's nobody to help me process it. There's nobody to help me navigate it. And that's when it lingers.
And is that the same as post-traumatic stress?
From the perspective, again, if I'm locating those three categories in the context of developmental events, it could lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, if we want to add the D, which is only necessary if you're billing insurance or if you really need to understand a diagnosis. But then let's look at a kind of fourth category, which is these kinds of events occur ongoingly, and maybe not even the super big T traumas, but the experiences of not feeling welcome, not feeling like you belong, not feeling like you're understood, having nobody to turn to, ongoing experiences of neglect, or the person that is supposed to be the one protecting me and helping me navigate this world is the source of the trauma. Now we're looking at complex PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, it brings up a sense of like when you're talking about it, I just feel like the fur baby aspect of ourselves. Like we just need that. We just really need that is part of the cohesion. I feel that like social aspect of when we're going through our adversities, and that little bit of troop, that little bit of tribe, that family, and that kindredness we just need it. And if it doesn't happen, if we're isolated, and so I'm both hearing that, that part of the response is isolation, but isolation is also part of the harm. And maybe that's part of the cycle
Yeah.
if we're getting at it. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that we can also just pull this forward, like we're talking about this all in the locale of the childhood and developmental trauma, but we might also locate this in the ongoing exposure or barrage of events that are happening in our adult life, right? And once again, even though we're not a child, if we don't have access to the resources that we need to help us navigate, again, whether it's big events, a flood, a fire, a major accident, a major loss, or the ongoing exposure to threats. I don't feel protected by my country. I don't know when someone might be coming to target me. I don't feel safe in the color of my skin, right? Whatever the experience might be that is leading one to remain in heightened threat responses without the ability to access sources of safety. That too would contribute to the experience of a complex traumatic response over time, repeated, chronic.
Yeah, so complex can be, it's like a multitude. There's many variation sources of threat over time, and it's not just a single event, right?
That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah. So when people's nervous systems are dysregulated and either they've had stress that's just stuck or there's trauma that's unresolved for childhood or contemporary conditions, which when I look at the news and when you speak just now, I'm just like funneling through little news clips and all these things that we're seeing right now with the way people are being treated in this effort towards deportation and vilifying. And I'm like, I play soccer with a lot of Latino folks, or I've been part of the Latino community my whole life in California, and I am not happy with what's happening. But I want to continue a little bit with the sense of like, how do we recognize trauma, right? Because if we're going to be informed in our society, like how do we recognize it in ourselves, and how do we recognize it in people around us or in people of power, institutions, or situations around us? So isolation, but I have a couple on my list, which are, cognitive distortions. People get really funky narrative stories, right, out of trauma. Hyper, uh, what do you call that? Conspiracy theories.
Oh, yeah.
Conspiracy theories. I'm like cognitive distortions. That sounds like there seems to be a connection there. Yeah, hypervigilance, and then there's also explicit and dormant symptoms, right? So those are some of the things that I had in my notes from paying attention to your work. So maybe you
Yeah.
can build on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think naming the how do I know if I have trauma and the vigilance that you describe of being on guard, not sleeping, the way that that might impact how am I feeling in my body on a day to day? Lots of tension, lots of it can interfere with our digestion. It can interfere with just real basic functionings, right? Like I'm edgy, I'm agitated with my loved ones. Like that might be one way that we would recognize a flavor. And all of that combined with, thoughts of kind of worst case scenario thinking and projecting into the future and so forth. And then we can also see it in that opposite domain that we were speaking about before of this loss of agency, right? This feeling of no matter what I do, what's the point? It's not really going to make a difference. And so this kind of apathy that maybe doesn't always get recognized as its own form of trauma, but it really is the accumulated impact of having enough experiences where no matter what you did, it didn't make a difference, that becomes a sense of self.
Yeah. And we could talk about IFS in parts and how crafty we can be as humans to protect the avoidance. Because I know myself, certain younger attitudes, certain younger parts or points of view were actually forms of avoidance. And they can be elaborate and they can be sweet and they can be smart and they can have reasons and they can have rationale in order at the top level. But deep down, there can be a more of like a dormant or a hidden uh, shutdown or collapse or defeat that's guiding the top story, right? So, and I know you know IFS, so talk about that a little bit because I think that's important to highlight because it's not the most easily recognized stress response or trauma response.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that very often we can look at the different parts within us and recognize that different parts have different dominant nervous system states, kind of like what you said. And we might be more comfortable or identified with a part of us that's more sympathetically driven. Like if I stay in my go, go, go mode, I don't have to feel the part of me that feels collapsed, shut down, and powerless. And even like and we might even think of that part that feels more powerless as a little bit of a closer access to the tender part inside, or the tender nature of vulnerability, the parts of us that carry grief, the parts of us that carry shame, that ultimately healing requires that we slow down enough to be present with. You use the word avoidance, and there's lots of ways that we avoid being with that tenderness in ourselves. Staying busy, workaholism, right? Just working a lot, perfectionism, needing to be in control, needing to manage it all.
Yeah.
Because if I let go, if I get still, I might have to be with that which feels heavy or contracted, or use the word collapsed. We can ultimately learn how to turn towards
Yeah.
any of those experiences of ourselves and states of our
Great.
nervous system or parts of ourselves in ways that helps us compassionately hold, and also like hear how we got there. Hold really, really lovingly how we got there.
Mm. It's good. It's so good. It's so important, and I like the downshift there, and that's what I really experienced. I was backpacking with my family, and I was listening to the trauma recovery session. I was like, all right, I'll check this out, and I was like, wow, this is really effective. I was so surprised at how effective it would can be because the organization and the ability to continue to slow down and each of the building blocks that you have there. And I really felt that. I felt like you were able to help me get to a more mature centered place with my own hardships. And I was like, wow, this is on an audiobook. This is great.
I'm reminded of someone else that shared with me that she listened to the trauma recovery CD program or audio program while she was paddleboarding. And here you're sharing about it being in nature. And I think, oh, you both have really spoken to my heart, because so much of my healing actually has taken place in the natural world, whether it's on the water, or I also do a lot of backpacking and hiking in the mountains here in Colorado. And finding those environments that we can feel held in, even though, yes, there's unpredictabilities of our natural world as well, but we can also find pockets of safety where we can feel held enough to then turn towards the parts of us that are stuck in what we would call trauma time, that are still
Yeah.
living in the activity based on the past.
Yeah. Trauma time, huh? That's interesting. It's like a state of being or a state.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like, and if we go back to the language of parts work for a second, I think very often when we have a part of us that's still in reactivity of some kind or another, it is living not in here and now orientation, or if it is, the trauma is still ongoing, right? But in a sense, like if we are safe enough now, but we're still in that reactivity, we can generally guess that that part is still carrying something from then and there versus
Yeah.
here and now.
Yeah. Good. Good. Well, you started to lead towards it, and you said there are things that we can do. And it's kind of as I was working through my notes, it's like, oh, there's actually good news here. There's a whole cadre of people like yourself, and there's people who do wilderness retreats, helping people feel more connected and safe. And there's this whole movement across our society, from clinical psychologists to, IFS practitioners to I'm an acupuncturist and more integrative, do some other things as well. But that's just like, that's part of the story. And there's people who actually have come to understand this nervous system, partly through polyvagal, partly through parts language, partly through EMDR. Yeah. I almost said EDMR. And so talk a little bit about this good news and the resources and the things that are available to help people get current in their nervous system in real time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I love what you just said. I feel like something happened in 2020 that led to not only our shutdown and our isolation and in our pandemic and so much loss, but there was also this explosion of resources that made its way not only just in the kind of echelons of the clinical world, but really into the general population. A depth of trauma-informed information went out there through podcasts like your work, through summits, through just this need, this deep, deep need to heal. And, you can see more trauma-informed conversations on social media and Instagram and TikTok, although I'm not on TikTok or YouTube or wherever, right? Like wherever you are looking for it now, that's free and at your fingertips. And that's amazing, right? That it's really sits at the heart of my work. When I started writing a blog, this is going to go back, over almost 15 years ago. And when I started to put my work out there, the whole purpose of that was, how do we take what was, kind of previously held more in the academic arenas and take this into the general public arena for the betterment of humanity. And so, how we heal is allowing ourselves to find those spaces that can hold us. And I love that you named, it's not just in psychotherapy, it can also be with an acupuncturist, it can also be in a yoga class, it can be in nature. There's so many environments, but knowing that we are either being wisely held and attuned to by another person, in polyvagal language, we call that co-regulation, or by a community that's co-regulating together, or that in a sense we're co-regulating with the natural world in a way that holds us and helps us to realign ourselves with what health feels like.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It brings up two things that I was curious to get your take on. And one is this kind of movement in this place. All right, so if we have these nervous systems that can be dysregulated and harmed, and part of our work is to maintain that and understand that that's our nature, right? That we have these stress responses, we have these trauma responses, and we didn't invent them. We just do our own style, or find our own way, right? These are ancient old things that go back deep in evolution and the story of why we're here today and how we're here today, which is part of my passion, is where like science can really help me kind of like feel bridge the ancient wisdom knowledge of traditions like yoga and Chinese medicine and kind of indigenous traditions, and kind of like help bring the body to that in a way that I feel really connected to, because I'm interested in the body, and I'm interested that we have a vagus nerve and it's running us in these different ways, right? It's fascinating. That's how we are. So, but normally things have like it's lived in the realm of like this, it's not just academic, but it's also lived in this area of the healing tradition, right? It's the healers who help, which is beautiful. It's great. It's great. And I like that you started talking about in 2020, it's starting to move into the social fabric, that there's this deeper, wiser understanding of ourselves and maybe our neighbors. And this is where I want to go to. I want to go towards understanding ourselves and our neighbors in a way that feels like a better form of culture than we're dealing with. But just talk about a little bit more about that movement and respond to my inspirations here, if you would.
Yeah. I'm reflecting on the statement about our neighbors, right? That there is some quality of how do we come out of isolation? I was just thinking about a conversation I had this week with someone who's living in a city, but she's living in an apartment building. And the experience of actually recently getting COVID again. And I know it's still out there.
Oh
And
yeah.
and the ability to put out there in a text to one of the neighbors, hey, feeling too ill. Do you have any NyQuil that you could just bring over tonight? Because I just can't get out to a store, right? And she
Yeah.
lives alone, right? And within an hour, had a care package sitting at her front door with all the things, right? And it was like, oh, and then that neighbor had talked to another neighbor who said, hey, she's sick down the hall, and gets a text, do you need me to walk your dog? Like just the things that ideally we do for each other as humans that closes the gap on isolation. That's the intentionality of being a neighbor, right? I can't help but think a little bit about Mr. Rogers here, who's one of my great allies in
Oh
my
yeah, nice.
my own healing work. But like that
Wow.
was,
Yeah.
there is this ideal that we would love to, in a sense, pull back in. Can we show up for each other in that way? And to not show up with distrust as the front line perspective on who's out there and who's out to get me, but to actually, in a sense, at least give someone the benefit of the doubt that they would show up if we asked for support.
Yeah. Well, it comes back to me for this theme of window of tolerance, right? So it's like sometimes I'm like, oh, you got to show up, right? And so with the nervous system that can't show up because it's caught in trauma time, right? So part of building social cohesion, part of that ability to be the neighbor on the neighbor side of
Yeah.
like, hey, I can show up for this, is working with your own nervous system, working with my own nervous system in a way where it's like, okay, I'm starting to do my inner work, right?
Yeah.
And that feels like that's part of it to a point.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also like there's this feeling of, I think that part of the old trauma story is the not enough element of it, right? Like there's some feeling of there's a limited amount of resources, and if I give you some of my resources, I'm therefore depleted of something. And when we shift that story, we can actually start to feel that when I give something to you, it's mutually uplifting. It's mutually beneficial. When I receive a gift that you're giving me, you feel good, right? And and like there is some way in which when we can tap into that that generative cycle
Yeah.
with each other, there is this quality of it moves us out of competition for resources into there's enough for all of us to thrive.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going two directions. I'm going backwards into like the kind of the giveaway societies,
Yeah,
the natural understanding of like your wealth isn't what you could give to other people.
I love
A lot
that.
of it's, that the giveaway, such an important element. Obviously, there's reciprocity there. I appreciate what you're talking about, building reciprocity cycles. I appreciate the scarcity aspect of it. Like, oh, when we're bought into scarcity or we're unconsciously driven, I would look towards some deep energy, evolutionary kind of roots that are just there, that are part of the being that we need to kind of figure out how to how to move through that because it's just there. I mean, you've worked with a lot of people. How many people don't have that experience of at times I'm not enough or scarcity feeling?
Totally.
Yeah.
And when we look back, even sometimes generationally, we can see that those wounds of scarcity might go back and back and back. Like we could trace within a family lineage the not enough. We can trace within a kind of cultural collective trauma level, the not enoughness, or, family members that went through phases of famine or went through, historical times of the Great Depression, right? I can
Yeah.
even think of times of going to my grandparents' house, who, of course, had lived through the Great Depression, and I admired this about my grandfather because while he had substantial accumulated wealth, he coupon shopped every single time I went to the store with him, and he was just like, "Oh, no, 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 this one's on sale," right? It was like it was such a deep, loving connection to like go coupon shopping with grandpa. And he could have afforded the full price cherries, but no, these ones were on sale.
It's good because my tendency to go deep into evolution and older primate roots and look at the sociality aspects that we're dealing with and how do we live them out in a way that both honors that deep biology, those deep behavioral biology, genetic biology, in ways that actually are more successful than the most scarcity, fear-driven versions.
Right.
I
And
tend to
can
think
I
about,
jump
yeah.
in with something?
Go
I,
ahead.
I
Yeah.
was at one of the Polyvagal Institute conferences last summer. These conferences are amazing. I highly recommend coming to one sometime because it's just a love fest. But this particular lecture was being given on the experience of refugee trauma and the perspective around having been a refugee, being basically forced to leave your country with only what you could carry. And that when you look generations ahead, very often these individuals are prone to some quality of hoarding, some quality of gathering and not letting go, whether that's hoarding material items, whether that's hoarding food, whether that's hoarding physical weight,
Interesting.
and how we feed ourselves. But there is some quality of if once in my family lineage we had to let go of everything that my land, my people, my community, there is some incumbent response within us that says, never again, I'm not going to lose it all. And yet that pendulum can swing too far.
Yeah. And I appreciate the intergenerational look at trauma, right? And that's helpful because it brings me closer to we're a country mostly of immigrants, except for the people who lived here originally. Yeah,
Yeah.
the first Americans and natives, the indigenous societies, those peoples that have gone through so much. And as you were talking about the polyvagal thing, I had to first I'm like, oh God, that must be amazing to be with a group of people who know how to get ventral. Like, oh, okay, this is good. It's all conscious. We're going to work with it. And then we can hold people. And our window of tolerance is like there's so much ventral energy, social engagement, connection cues that people can, hold when people get into other states. It must be really cool. I can appreciate that. And also I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of medicine for everybody, right? That's kind of where what we're asking, like, can we, live and be alive in a more socially engaged, trusting, loving, honest way, right?
Yeah.
That's the hope of trauma work.
Yeah. That's the
Yeah,
hope of trauma work. It's
yeah,
not just, I mean, this is the whole point of the trauma recovery, audio program you listen to, or my post-traumatic growth guidebook. It's the whole point is not so much that it's only for us, although ideally we want to get to the place where we feel freed up, where we feel more connected to our authentic self, where we feel capable of being our own greatest potential in the world. And then the next step is how do I basically become that generative person that my own healing is now of benefit to you, to each other, to my community. I become the one that is now able to be, guide others or be that resource or source of support.
and it brings me a couple places. And one is that I just when I was out at elevation on the granite in Yosemite and just open, lifted. It's just like the thing about trust and the social engagement is it feels so good to be lightened and free and out and slow down enough to be related with oneself, where I'm like, yeah, my fur baby's good. I'm okay. My inner primate's like, I'm good. I'm connected, right? It's great. It's great. It feels amazing to live that way. Right. And it's hard to not live that way. It's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it brings me to that sense at one level that it feels good, which is part of it. And the other level, which I think I just lost my train of thought, you said that and there's part of me that wants to go to this idea of society a little bit more, and talk about that. And then there's part of me that was tuning into the intergenerational trauma and how valuable that is. And there was that glimpse in there, and I think I'm just lost my way. Let's see. Totally lost my way.
I think I'm going to borrow a little bit from Gandalf, right?
Oh yeah.
Right? Those, what is it? What's the phrase? Those who are lost
All
are,
who wander aren't lost.
there we go. All who
Yes.
wander
Thank
aren't
you.
lost. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I actually, when you said Gandalf, I suddenly was there. I'm like, okay, that was the other thing. I wanted to go towards the close up and talk about what my original intention was, which was society, and being and dealing with the what I'm just going to say is a very divisive, scarcity based, fear driven agenda that's being driven down by this administration across this country at lots of different levels.
Yeah.
And that there's people I know who feel good about that. It's also kind of weird as a neighbor thing. It's like, wow, people are actually some people are positive about this,
Right.
and that's hard,
That's hard.
super hard. And how to stay this window of tolerance, right? How do we work with our window of tolerance? How do I work with my window? Can we work with our window of tolerance? That's the one side. I'm gonna let you choose which way to go. And the other side is the Gandalf side, which is the hero's journey or the heroine's adventure. That this part of our cycle of becoming is to go through dysregulated states and come back with hard-earned wisdom.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
guess the word that comes to my mind is how do is neither it's like almost neither of those directions or both. I don't know, you'll decide. But
Okay.
it's this quality of how do we walk through the world with clarity about our own values, our own boundaries, and at the same time keep our hearts open, right? So that, like, as we are navigating in our society with people who have really different values, who are standing up for something that to us hurts our own heart, we can we can know who we are, what we stand for, what our truth is, what keeps us in our own integrity, and do so in a way that also doesn't have to continue to contribute to the divisive qualities that are being driven down the pipeline of our media and our news sources, and everything out there actually serves to divide, right? That is the intention of so much of that. And so, can I be in my own truth, have a boundary around that so that that's a kind of non-negotiable? I know who I stand up for. I know what I'm willing to speak up or protect. And at the same time, I can hold a curiosity, if nothing else. I can hold enough curiosity about what is driving this other person and their beliefs and their convictions. And now we can come back around to the nervous system. Right? It strikes me how sometimes when I'm offering kind of nervous system informed groups in the world, right? Like sometimes to very large community spaces, I know that I'm speaking to people across political, whatever realms, like, different perspectives. I know that I'm speaking to people that have very different views, or that are coming from very different perspectives, or people that are located more in really different camps on very big issues right now. And so much of what I'm working on teaching is how do we get better at standing in relationship to difference, holding this quality of both and simultaneously giving cues of the social engagement system, giving cues of ventral safety so that we can navigate that without jumping out of the window.
That's good. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So,
And it's ongoing work because it's
I was gonna go, okay, you say how, the question is, how do we do that? I'm like, how do we do that?
how
And we
do
do
we
it by doing it, right? There's no way to peace is the way. Yeah. Little Thich Nhat
Yeah.
Hanh kind of.
Yeah, and that like part of how we do that is we're going to have the hard conversation, but we're also going to tune in. What are the nervous system cues that I might be giving right now?
Yeah.
Are my words matching my facial expressions, my body language, my voice tone?
Yeah.
Am I inadvertently putting someone into defensive states because I'm in a defensive state?
Yeah. No, that's great. And I like there's a way in which when you presence the nervous system that it goes below political divisions,
Yeah.
right? That somehow that when we start attuning to our nervous system, that we are become more cohesive, and then we're able to be more cohesive with other people. And I feel like you answered my question, which is great.
Somehow in there. But like maybe part of it, to use your language, is just to remember that we all have a fur baby.
Yeah, totally. Which is
Right?
hard to do. It's hard to do when I see these guys all geared up with masks and coming in, and it's like, wow. And I know at some point there's going to be some story. It's going to be some, news media thing about this former ICE agent who feels terrible and he's traumatized, and that's going to happen, right?
Yeah,
That's happening. They're in the dehumanization process of any kind of war.
that's right. That's right. And
Oh,
and then we can, even just lean in for a moment on the topic of moral injury, because part of why people can dehumanize another is very often a social conditioning, and it's embedded in the kinds of training that we get within military or some policing environments that are basically feeding us the idea that we're doing something good in the action of harming another. And then I've, worked with individuals who suddenly wake up to this moment where I'm actually making eye contact with this person that I was told to harm, and realizing they're just like me, right? That's a moment of profound humanity that we get, that we have the opportunity to then realize I can't do what I was told to do. Now that's hard. That's a tricky moment.
yeah, I'm going to Vietnam right now, and stories of my late friend who talked about Vietnam and how he dealt with it, and the people who sent people to Vietnam. And the teaching in his book, which is called Something Funny Happened on the Way to the Ambush by Mac, right, is that when you go and you invade something that you don't understand, and you send people there who don't understand it too, you leave people with a legacy that's just unbearable. Some of the things that they have to go through. It's
Yeah.
just it's really hard. But I like what you're saying. I really appreciate you for coming on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I feel like I could keep talking. I kind of, when I listen to your podcast, I listen to the book, I'm like, okay, she's kindred. I'm going to feel connected to her. You brought in Gandalf. I know for sure we're connected.
Thanks for getting the quote right. I was like, I know Gandalf is relevant right now.
Yes, yes, I know. We need a Gandalf. We need Gandalf to help us through this.
Well, thank you.
So
Thank
I
you for having
appreciate
me.
you. Thanks for being on the show today.
A pleasure.
Yeah.